Well, it's good to be back with you for another day of Bible study as we are continuing on through the Advent 25 days, where we are using the Jesse tree to walk through those days, which is essentially looking at Jesus' family tree, the characters that are a part of that, as well as the stories that are showing us each and every step of the way the heart of God and the need for Jesus so that we will recognize him whenever he arrives there in Bethlehem on December 25th. If you'd like to know more about the study, you can visit that URL right there, go.christtable.today/Jesse Tree. You'll find information about how you can be a part of all of this. And if you'd like to know more about who we are at Christ Table, right there, www.christtable.today. Well, we find ourselves continuing on through the story, and we're kind of picking up not too long after we left off yesterday with the law and the review of that in Deuteronomy. So today we find ourselves in the individual who followed Moses in leadership of the people of Israel, and that is Joshua. So we'll be in Joshua chapter 2, first 21 verses, which is one of the better known stories in the Old Testament, as well as one of the crazier stories in the Old Testament. And it involves this right here. This is our ornament for today, which is a rope. And that is the symbol that characterizes best that story in Joshua chapter 2. And so we won't walk through all of it here, but I would encourage you to kind of pull it out and read through it. It's interesting, especially if you heard this story as a child. It's very interesting to go back and read these stories as an adult through an adult lens. There are a lot of questions that pop up whenever you read these stories that you read as a child, as an adult, and you begin to see them, and ask those adult questions. And a lot of times those questions don't easily wrap up into a nice Christmas package with a beautiful bow. Some of these stories are just darn messy. There are tough questions which aren't easily answered, and I don't want to discourage you from asking those questions. In fact, I want to encourage you to face those questions, to ask those things, but do so with an understanding that you may not come out with a perfect answer at the end of asking those questions. And even if you do, the answer that you feel or find is right may not actually be one that you like very much. And that's okay. The Bible is real. The Bible is raw. The Bible isn't always necessarily interested in making us feel comfortable by answering all of our questions in ways that we want. Sometimes we just have to understand that the story isn't intended to do that. The story is intended to help us understand and reflect the heart of God in a world that doesn't always make sense. So in this story, we are introduced to a lady named Rahab, who is who's a tiger, who is a strong woman, who is very self-confident and self-assured, and also is an advocate for herself in a world that is dominated by men, that is a patriarchal society. Rahab seems to be extremely 180 degrees opposite of that. And so we are introduced to her whenever these two spies come into the country in order to assess the situation. God had promised them this land. People are already inhabiting the land, and so they send people in beforehand in order to figure out what's going on in the land, where the strongholds are, whether or not there's space. So all of these things are going on, which is interesting, because we would expect, after reading the chapter previous to this, Joshua chapter 1, where the baton is handed to Joshua and they're right at the threshold of the promised land, that they would just go right in. But instead, what we have here is a pause. What we have here is a moment where they stop and where they breathe and where they question, and it's hard to say whether or not that pause, that breathing was right or was needful or was what God wanted. But I think what we can say is that sometimes waylays are necessary. Sometimes pauses in life are helpful, and sometimes pauses in life are even needful. I know that there have been moments on my journey where it just felt like I was in an excruciating holding pattern where things had been moving quickly. I felt like I was just on the edge of the promised land of that thing that God had promised to me, or that I knew was just there within arm's reach. And then this waylay, this holding pattern, this life pause, um, seemed to keep that thing just out of reach for far longer than I thought was needful, that I thought was right. Um, and those moments can be difficult. Those moments can especially be difficult on your faith whenever you feel like it's something that God has promised you, something that you need in order to survive or to thrive. And certainly for the Israelites, they thought that the promised land was that for them, but they could not see maybe that this waylay was necessary. And part of the necessity of this waylay was so that I think that Rahab and her family could be a part of this story. And so the two spies go into the city of Jericho. They certainly don't want to be identified as being who they are, or why they're there, or where they're from, and so they find a place to duck and cover in the house of what appears from the Hebrew text to likely be a prostitute. Uh, so they find this place, and begins to um, it begins to unravel a little bit for them. And this is in our text, in our story today. The king of the city finds out that there are spies. They begin searching for them. They come to the house of Rahab. She sends them up to the roof and says, the guys aren't here. They've left. You better rush to go and find them if you're going to get there. Um, she lies. They come back down and they strike up a conversation. And it's clear to them that she understands why they're there in the city. And it's also clear to them that she has an understanding of the power of God, maybe even seems to have a relationship with their God, or wants to. So they strike this deal with her. But before we get to that deal, I think it's important for us to say that God sees people differently than we do. This whole story being wrapped around the story of a sex worker, of a prostitute, is it's messy. It's chaos, right? It's hard to wrap this story up into a tight little bow. As a kid, not a big deal. As an adult, there are some questions. I have some questions when I come to this. Why Rahab? How did she know about God? These are questions that I think are worth asking and are worth wrestling with. And I think even in our life, it forces us to confront this fact that God sees people differently than we do, that God seems to categorize people differently than we do. Sometimes it's even upside down. The people who I might say are the people who are most deserving, are the most God-centered, the people who would be most likely to be utilized by God and be blessed by Him, are quite the opposite, 180 degrees. And the people who I might say are the least deserving, are the furthest from God, are active in things that are the most abhorrent to God, are the people who God blesses and even endorses sometimes, and uses most radically for His good. Our judgment is not God's judgment. Whom we would bless and curse is not whom God seems to bless and curse. This isn't just in the story of Rahab. This is in all of the stories, let me tell you. So Joshua 2, I want to jump in right here to this conversation where she's just essentially professed faith or understanding in the power of their God. She says, "For the Lord your God," Rahab says, "is supreme, the supreme God of the heavens above and the earth below. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will be kind to me and my family, since I'd helped you. Give me some guarantee that when Jericho is conquered, that you will let me live along with my father and my mother, my brothers and my sisters and all of their families." So they offer their own lives for her safety, and they agree to it. "And if you don't betray us," they said, "we will keep our promise and be kind to you when the Lord gives us this land." Then, since Rahab's house was built into the town wall, she let them down by a rope through the window. "Escape to the hill country," she told them. "Hide there for 3 days from the men searching for you. Then, when they have returned, you can go on your way." Before they left, the men told her, "We will be bound by the oath that we've taken only if you follow these instructions. When we come into the land, you must leave this scarlet rope hanging from the window through which you let us down. All of your family members, your mother, your father, your brothers, your relatives, your dogs, your cats, everything must be here inside of this house. And if they go out in the street and are killed, it's not going to be our fault. But if anyone lays a hand on you inside the house, we will accept the responsibility for the death of those who do that, or the responsibility for your family's death if that happens. So if you betray us, now we're not going to be bound by this oath in any way." And she says, "All right, that sounds good to me. I accept your terms." And so she sends them on their way, leaving a scarlet rope, a red rope, hanging from the window. Never underestimate other people. This is a strong, powerful, centered, and I would even say God-fearing woman. And this idea that she saves her family and herself with a scarlet red rope, to me, is a reminder of the fact that there is a thread, a rope, all throughout these Hebrew, what we call the Old Testament scriptures, that are tying us back into the story of God and the story of Jesus. The fact that it's red, red is the color of blood. It's a reminder to me that just as Rahab was saved by a red rope, we are saved by the crimson, the red blood of Jesus Christ, the scripture tells us. I also think, too, that this story is a reminder to us, as I've kind of hinted at, that God dramatically uses and includes those who are not people who we would include or use. Rahab, actually, if you continue and follow the trajectory of the story forward, Rahab becomes a great ancestor of the great King David, and King David is an ancestor of Jesus himself. And so Rahab is a member of Jesus' family tree. Without Rahab, that family tree would not have led towards King David, would not have led towards Jesus. So there's a piece of Rahab, genetically, inside of David and inside of Jesus. And I think that this is a dramatic story of confrontation, of our hang-ups. And I think it is also, as well, a dramatic story of how God is involved and working in those people, in those professions, and in those places where we would least expect to find them and might even reject them. Don't underestimate the Rahabs of the world. Certainly don't underestimate their tenacity, but also I would say don't underestimate that. Don't underestimate God's not only ability to use them, but God's choice of using them as well. Well, until tomorrow, looking forward to being with you.